Hello goobers and welcome back to the Kebabian YouTube channel. I've spent the past month and over 80 hours with the Nintendo Switch 2, playing every last ounce out of it in order to not only have fun with the console, but also to answer this question. Is the Nintendo Switch 2 actually worth it? Now, I know every YouTuber and their mom have already done videos like this and answered this question probably, but in my case, I really wanted to spend a good amount of time with the system before giving my thoughts on the console. And now, after a month, I can safely say I've done just that, which is why in this video I want to give an honest review of the Switch 2, telling you its pros, its cons, and everything in between in order to, at the end of this video, determine whether or not you should purchase it. The Switch 2 is truly a wild console, and I have a lot to talk about in this video, but I'm going to try my best not to make it too long, so I hope you'll join me in today in an informative video discussing my complete and unfiltered thoughts on the Switch 2. With all that said though, enough yammering, and let's get into it. I hardly know where to even begin with this system. There's a lot to unpack, but I suppose let's start with the design of the console. Overall, I am incredibly surprised by how clean and sleek this console looks considering this is coming from Nintendo. It feels very premium and the material has a very nice matte finish to it, bringing the whole system together. This console just looks sexy. You'll look much more like a gamer when using it compared to Switch 1. I seriously just love the design it takes on. It's also very thin and maintains a light weight while still packing in a whole lot of power. Seriously, comparing this to other handhelds on the market like the Steam Deck or ROG Ally, it is much cleaner and compact design-wise, or at least that's my take on it. The 7.9-inch screen is also a game changer and feels considerably larger than the Switch 1. It really makes gaming in handheld mode a much more premium experience. It just feels like you're seeing more on screen for what every game has to offer, if that makes sense. The screen itself is also beautiful, and although it's only in 1080p, the fact that we can get up to 120 FPS on a piece of Nintendo hardware is still insane to me. The screen is only an LCD compared to an OLED display, but I'm going to be completely honest, it's a barely noticeable change, and unless you're really looking for the differences in quality comparing it to an OLED, you'll find nothing wrong. Looking at what's on the screen though, you'll find the power and volume buttons on the top as well as a headphone jack, one of two USB charging ports, and the game card slot, which has been made a little bit nicer to access. And then on the bottom there is another charging port, which is really convenient. It's great to have two options for charging. Finally on the back there is of course the much improved kickstand that can be adjusted any way you like and holds up very well. Beneath it is also a spot for a microSD Express card. Overall, you get about everything you need on this screen, and I like it a lot, even if most of it is just copy pasted from Switch 1. In terms of comfortability though, it feels pretty good to hold, but really not much better than the Switch 1. In fact, this may be my only gripe with the console's design, because the Joy-Cons themselves can be kind of uncomfortable to play with and make my hands cramp after an hour or two of use. Maybe this is just me though, and who knows how much of a problem this will really be for others. Either way, there are other options for controllers, but we'll get to that later. For now though, let's actually talk about the Joy-Cons by themselves for a second. These new and improved Joy-Con 2 controllers are quite a big upgrade from the Switch 1. They keep the overall feel of a Joy-Con while also bringing it up a notch. First of all, the Joy-Cons are quite a bit larger. Whether or not that's a good thing kind of depends on the size of your hands, but for me they're just fine. They also have a much sleeker and premium design, and you can just tell the material is much more finalized than the Switch 1's Joy-Cons, which felt kind of plasticky. Just like the screen, they also stick with the sleek all-black design with a little bit of red and blue film under the analog sticks and also on the sides, which I really like. One thing I must talk about though is the SL and SR buttons on the side of the controller, meant for playing with a single Joy-Con. These have been made much larger and actually feel like you're pressing something now, as opposed to the Switch 1 Joy-Cons, which had a very unsatisfying feel when it came to those buttons. The right Joy-Con also has the brand new C or chat button, but I'll be honest, I have not used it once. A bit more on that later though. Finally, these Joy-Cons can of course snap onto the screen via the magnetic properties the screen houses in order to bring the console together. And really quickly, can I just say that snapping these things onto the screen is one of the most satisfying things ever? Like, screw playing the console, I could just do this all day. I seriously find myself snapping these things off and on while in the middle of a game, just because it really is super satisfying. Overall, I adore this console's design, and it's really just perfect, a well-needed upgrade from Switch 1. I will say it is sort of disappointing that there's no fun colors tied to it, or at least a version of it with cool colors, but either way, I'm still all for this complete black look they're going for. It houses a much more modern feel while still being practical to use. It does lack a bit of classic Nintendo charm in terms of it looking fun and interesting, but at the end of the day, I love this, and it gets a 9.5 out of 10 from me design-wise. However, we're just scratching the surface, and it's time to look at what this console's like upon powering it on. When you turn this console on for the first time, you'll be greeted with the setup screen, of course, but after that, you're thrown right into the newly polished Switch 2 home screen. Now, I must say I'm kind of disappointed just how similar the menu really is to the Switch 1. It literally does nothing different, and I think Nintendo played it very safe here, whereas in the past, they've always innovated and created new wacky home screens for every console that had one. At the end of the day, though, it is just a home screen, and you won't be on it a whole lot. I will say, however, the upgraded version of the Switch 1 menu we know and love is very nice. Everything has been slightly polished from Switch 1, and I think they really tried to make everything here more rounded and have more smooth edges on this menu, which they did a good job with. Would I have preferred an entirely new menu though? Absolutely yes. But it is what it is, and the menu has everything the Switch 1 did, plus some added stuff like the game chat app and whatnot, but other than that, this is remotely unchanged. Speaking of game chat, I sadly haven't gotten to use it at all, because none of my friends have actually gotten a Switch 2, meaning I have nobody to test it with. I also didn't buy the Switch 2 camera because I frankly think it's overpriced and the quality doesn't look great. Anyways, I think overall the home menu is like a 7 out of 10 for me. I just wish it had some more actual new stuff, but it's nowhere near a deal breaker by any means. I mean, I know a lot of people think that like a 7 out of 10 is mid now, but I mean, I think it's better. It's not mid because it does what the Switch 1 home menu did, just better, but I wish it was new. But now it's time we discuss what it's actually like to play with the console. Just like the Switch 1, there are 3 different modes the Switch 2 can be played in: Handheld Mode, TV Mode, and Tabletop Mode. I've definitely used Handheld Mode the most, and it's not even a competition. I think what I love about Handheld Mode is just how easy it is to pick up and play anywhere. Like, if I'm feeling lazy one day, I can just sit on my couch and use it. Or if I'm traveling somewhere, I can play with it in the car or on a plane and then play at my destination. It's just very convenient, and that's probably why I favor it over any other mode. As I said earlier, in Handheld, this system can run games up to 120 FPS in 1080p, and after playing with the system for about a month, I can say it does deliver on this very well. Unsupported games like Mario Kart World and the upgraded version of Breath of the Wild, they are stable at 120 FPS, which is an absolute game changer from Switch 1, because every game just feels incredibly smooth now, as opposed to many Switch 1 games that chugged at 30 frames sometimes. So that's great, but what about resolution? Well, as I said, in Handheld, the system is locked at 1080p. However, it looks much better than I expected it to, because although 1080p is the same as what we had on Switch 1, in Handheld at least, the Switch 2 supports HDR even in Handheld, which really enhances the experience more than I expected, because the colors and visuals just look much more fleshed out now and have a little bit more life to them. Overall, this makes playing the system in Handheld a very fun and seamless experience, and I think if Handheld gaming is your thing, it might definitely be worth checking out the Switch 2. But hey, maybe you're more into playing on a big screen like a TV or monitor, and in that case, TV mode will have you covered. Upon sliding the Switch 2 into the dock and connecting the dock to a display of choice, you'll be able to experience your Switch 2 and its games on a larger scale screen. This is perfect if you're used to gaming on other home consoles, because this will be much more familiar to you. It's just the same as what it's like using a PlayStation or Xbox console, except with a Nintendo Code of Paint this time around. As well as this though, when you connect the Switch 2 to a compatible screen, of course, it can output resolution in up to 4K and 60 FPS, or if you prefer, 1440p with 120 FPS, that's also an option. And it looks absolutely incredible. It's still hard to believe that a Nintendo console can look this good. I seriously think the graphics are very close to that of a PS5 or Xbox Series console. It just looks phenomenal. And once again, when playing games like Mario Kart World or Breath of the Wild, the 4K capabilities really shine, and pairing that with HDR as well, it makes for a pretty incredible experience, all things considered. Now, for me personally, TV mode isn't my preferred way of playing. However, it is perfect for playing multiplayer games with friends or family, or if you just want to experience a game at its full graphical potential. But I personally find this console to be more handheld focused, and thus I think it's better in that respect. I would say if you only want a console to use on a TV or monitor, you might just want to consider getting a PlayStation or Xbox console. That is, of course, unless you really want to play Nintendo exclusives like Mario Kart World and the upcoming Donkey Kong Bonanza game. Then finally, I briefly want to touch on Tabletop Mode. All this mode is essentially handheld, but rather than holding the console up, you can put up the kickstand and use a controller to play it like this. This is definitely the mode I have used the least, and the same applied with the Switch 1, because it really is just another way to play handheld, but this time around, it makes things a little easier if you want to potentially play with a group of people. But in that case, I would just say to use a TV to play. If you don't have a TV around though, then this mode is probably the way to go for local multiplayer gaming. It's just very circumstantial though, and I don't see myself using this mode much at all. You can, however, take much more advantage of the Joy-Con's mouse functionalities when playing in tabletop, because this is now something that the Joy-Cons can do, and I personally like it quite a lot. The mouse is actually very responsive. In fact, it feels almost like using a regular mouse, which is pretty cool, and it also has the ability to be used really anywhere, because although it is ideal to use the mouse on a hard flat surface, it is very much possible to just use it on your pant leg or a cushion. I can confirm it will still work pretty well. Now, as for the games that will actually take advantage of this, it's really up to developers to decide, but for now, we can only hope that this will actually be a feature that gets used. However, currently games like Fortnite and Cyberpunk 2077 are using it, which is neat, and those games actually make practical use out of it. I do genuinely hope this feature is done well and doesn't just go off to be a one-off gimmick like the Wii U gamepad or something like that, because it has a lot of potential and it's definitely a fun feature, and thus once again I hope mouse mode actually gets used. You could also bring out the Switch 2 Pro controller when playing in tabletop mode. By the way, this is also my excuse to talk about this controller because I didn't know where else to fit it in the video. Anyways, I think the Pro controller is very much worth purchasing, especially if you're getting tired of the Joy-Cons, because frankly, they aren't the most comfortable thing, and they also cost $95, which I really don't get because the Pro controller is cheaper at only $85 and is also much better. Nintendo somehow managed to improve upon their already really good Switch 1 Pro controller by making the material feel a little nicer, adding mappable GL and GR buttons on the back, and also making the analog sticks feel buttery smooth. Seriously, these things feel incredible to move around and truly enhances the whole experience if you ask me. This is also a great controller to pick up if you're looking for an extra controller beyond the single set of Joy-Cons, because this is a substantially more comfortable option, and as I said, it costs less. I would recommend anyone who has a Switch 2 to pick up this controller, because it is seriously a game changer, even if you don't necessarily need a second controller. Anyways though, that's just my quick little review of the Switch 2 Pro controller. Alright, I think it's now time we discuss games you can play on the Switch 2, and I won't sugarcoat it, there's not much. Don't get me wrong, there are some good games out, but just not too many of them. As for me, I've really only been playing Mario Kart World and Breath of the Wild Nintendo Switch 2 edition. However, I am planning on soon checking out games like Cyberpunk 2077, and I have checked out a little bit of Split's Fiction, I suppose. But both of these games can be played on other consoles or PC. Thus, when it comes to Nintendo exclusive, there's really only Mario Kart World, as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were both on Switch 1, and Welcome Tour is just a tech demo. But I must say, Mario Kart World is, in my opinion, absolutely phenomenal, and easily the most content-packed Mario Kart at launch of all time. In fact, I've already managed to spend over 65 hours with the game, and I still have not gotten bored. You can of course play the classic Grand Prix mode we all know and love, filled with all new cups and courses that all feel unique and very fun. You can also shake things up with the new Knockout Tour mode, a mode that sort of reminds me of Fall Guys, where you have to reach a series of checkpoints, and at each checkpoint the last 4 players will be eliminated, leaving less and less players until eventually it comes down to just a few opponents competing for first. I absolutely love this mode, and it's probably my new favorite way of playing Mario Kart in all honesty. It just feels fresh, and it takes on a much more competitive feel compared to Grand Prix. Then there is of course the open world mode, which I like a lot more than a lot of people right now, but I will say it would be nice if it had a little more content packed into it. Essentially, free roam is just a large map featuring every course in the Grand Prix that you get to drive around, finding secrets and uncovering question block panels, P-switch challenges, and Peach medallions. It definitely has things to do, and I won't deny that, but it needs some updates, as it currently doesn't feel very fleshed out, like, at all, actually. The last thing I'll talk about is the online mode, where you can hop into an online lobby with either random people, or you can also create a room and invite your friends to it to play Grand Prix or Knockout Tour against other players. I personally am having a lot of fun with the online mode, as it provides much more of a challenge compared to just going against CPUs, and once again, it just brings a much more competitive feel, which I really enjoy. They did, however, just make a somewhat controversial change to online, but I'm not going to touch on that now. In fact, I'm going to have a complete review for Mario Kart World coming out in the near future, but that was my quick overview of it. But what about other games? Well, as I mentioned a few times now, there is the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom Nintendo Switch 2 edition games, which are essentially just the same games from the Switch 1, but polished with better graphics and frame rates. And if you already own the original game, it's definitely worth checking these out, not only for improved performance, but also because they include the new Zelda Notes feature via the Nintendo Switch mobile app, which can connect to the game and unlock a whole lot of cool things. Then there is the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, which, as I said, is just a glorified tutorial/tech demo. However, there is actually some fun to be had with it. You can play some unique mini-games that utilize the Switch 2's capabilities, or just run around collecting stamps. But would I recommend you play it for $10? Absolutely not. I'm sorry, this game is literally just a tutorial. It's the instruction manual, essentially. Then, for the third-party games, there are a few options. First of all, there is Cyberpunk 2077, which is probably by far the best current new third-party game on the Switch 2. That makes sense. Although I haven't actually checked it out just yet. I know it does a great job showing off what the Switch 2 can do in the graphical department, as the game looks and runs very well, proving that the Switch 2 will actually have potential for some good third-party games to come to it. As well as this, Cyberpunk 2077 also utilizes mouse controls, which is very cool, and it isn't a game keycard. The game is actually stored on the cartridge rather than just being a download. Beyond this game, though, there are also some other good third-party picks. There's Sonic X Shadow Generations, Bravely Default Remastered, Fast Fusion, Deltarune, a very much improved version of Fortnite, same goes for Hogwarts Legacy, and much more. However, while it's great to have these games in the library, most of them can be played on any other console as well. They aren't exclusive to Switch 2. Finally, for games, it should be noted that mostly every single Switch 1 game can be played on the Switch 2, the only exceptions being games that really relied on features of the Switch 1 in order to be playable. This means that as well as a small Switch 2 library, there's also a massive library of over 10,000 Switch 1 games that are playable on this console. In addition to this, there will be many more Nintendo exclusives coming out down the line. In fact, Donkey Kong Bonanza releases July 17th, which is looking to be an incredible release, and games like Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment and Metroid Prime 4 are all confirmed to be coming later this year, with many more games certainly following. Alright, it's time for my final verdict on the Nintendo Switch 2, and the segment where we answer the question of if this system is worth buying. I personally have been loving the Switch 2, and it's the perfect console for me. It's great being able to play in handheld mode wherever I'm at, while also getting to use it on the TV for couch co-op gaming in games like Mario Kart World. The console is also very powerful. In fact, it kind of blew me and a lot of other people away. It makes playing first-party games run much smoother and looks much better than Switch 1, and also allows for more third-party titles to come to the console while still maintaining good graphics and frame rates. The console looks very nice and sleek while staying light and convenient, making it once again very, very easy to use anywhere, and I honestly think they killed it design-wise. I could seriously just gush on how good the system looks. Comfortability-wise, it's fine. The Joy-Cons are just alright, but they are still an improvement from the Switch 1, as they are a bit bigger and nicer, just as the whole console is. One thing I would have really liked with this console, however, is an entirely new home menu, rather than just a refined version of the already established Switch 1 menu, but it really isn't that big of a deal to me since it still looks nice. It just would have been better if it was entirely unique in my opinion. With all these factors taken into consideration though, I think my personal rating of the Switch 2 is a solid 8.5 out of 10. This console is the perfect upgrade of the Nintendo Switch 1 system that the community has come to love over these past 8 years, but the only thing keeping it from being at least a 9 for me is probably the fact that that's all it is, just a Switch 1 upgrade, rather than an entirely new console with its own charms and gimmicks. However, looking at it from the standpoint of being an upgrade, like I said, it's definitely the perfect upgrade and what the Switch 1 really needed. But even though I'm really liking the console, is it the right pick for you, and is it worth buying? Well, to answer this question, it really depends on what you're looking for. If you literally just want an upgraded Switch 1 in order to get a bigger screen, have higher frame rates and resolutions and things like that, then I would recommend you get this console right now, because as I said, it is seriously the perfect Switch 1 upgrade for anybody getting tired of the Switch 1's somewhat outdated hardware. But if you are still fine with the Switch 1's performance and graphics and are having fun playing the game still releasing on it and aren't really looking to play any of the current Switch 2 exclusive games, then I would probably just say to stick with the Switch 1 for now at least and wait for a game to come out on Switch 2 that really strikes your interest. If you don't have a Switch 1 though and are debating on which console to get between the two, I would 100% recommend you go the extra mile and pay the extra $150 to get a Switch 2, because you'll be able to play basically every single Switch 1 game there is, many of which have improved graphics and performance, as well as new games coming out like Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. You'll also just be playing on newer hardware with a bigger screen and sleeker design, which is always a bonus. But if you're just looking for a handheld system to play on and aren't necessarily looking to play Switch 2 exclusive games like Mario Kart World and really aren't into Nintendo games much as a whole, I would recommend you just go for something like a Steam Deck or ROG Ally instead. Because although these are more expensive options for the most part, you can play a much more extensive library of PC and console games while still getting that same handheld experience which the Switch 2 offers. Note that if you ask me, the Switch 2 is much more geared to the handheld side of things, and although I think Nintendo did a great job optimizing the Switch 2 for TVs and monitors, it's just a lot more convenient for playing in handheld. That's at least in my opinion though. Playing while docked though is definitely still an option, and it's still great to play in. But there you have it. The Switch 2 has had quite an interesting launch, with many people debating whether or not they should purchase it, and I hope this video was helpful if you are one of those people. I tried my best to cover as much as I could and give my honest thoughts even after playing the console for a month. Once again, I know many other people have already shared their thoughts on the console and made review videos on it, but I really wanted to spend a good amount of time with the system before giving my full opinions. I'm gonna have a lot more Switch 2 content coming this summer, covering games and other Switch 2 related things, and if that's something you want to see, please consider subscribing, as it really does help me out. Anyways though, with all that said, thank you all for watching this video. I really do hope it helped. This has been Kebabian on the Nintendo Switch 2 review, and I will see you all in the next one. Later!